Well, thank you, Madam Chairman. And thank you for hosting the debate today, and thank you to ODI for putting it on, and thank you indeed to Open Europe for publishing this paper. I happen to be in the fantastic position of being able to agree with both the previous speakers almost entirely. Glynis, with a passionate plea about how we should be human, we should be humanitarian, we should save lives in danger, we should lift people out of poverty. You know, absolutely, there's no politics in that. That's what most people believe. But I do view the Open Europe report, I really do welcome the Open Europe report, because I think where some people get it wrong is that when there is implied criticism of some element of the European Commission, it's then deemed to be completely dismissed out of hand because you cannot be critical of such an institution. And I speak with some knowledge of this. The EU aid budget was not something that I naturally kind of wanted to look at when I entered European politics, when I was elected in 1999. And when I was the member of the European Parliament, when I was elected, I was the most junior member of the European Parliament. I was one of the youngest that was elected that year, and so was stuck on two committees that no one else wanted to go on. They were the Budget Committee and the Budgetary Control Committee. And I've always looked at the EU aid programme through the eyes of a person who wants to get better value for money. And then never has that been more true than it is now, actually, because when budgets are tight, if you look at my constituency postbag, if I get letters about EU aid, it's more concern about the government's commitment to maintain a high level, rather than people saying we should be paying more. So when elected to the European Parliament, as someone who didn't know much about this subject and stuck on a committee that I didn't know much about, I did what everybody else did, which is just read about. I read a number of the European Court of Auditors reports on various subjects, but there was one project back then that left many people with a very, very deep impression. And it exposed some of the problems of how the European Commission delivered EU aid and humanitarian aid, and caused a lot of controversy. Now, you'll remember, most of you, that in 1998, Hurricane Mitch devastated Central America, leaving 7,000 dead, tens of thousands homeless, and crops destroyed, livelihoods gone. It was an appalling natural disaster. As you would expect, the world came together. Everybody saw the television pictures, masses of donations came in. And the European Union promised a £170 million package and pledged to help the survivors of the disaster. A handful of top EU officials were dispatched and visited, had their photos taken, and 2 years later, not a penny of that aid had been delivered. In 2000, the House of Commons Select Committee on International Development would accuse the European Commission of gesture politics. I'd say, actually, the problems were, in a way, worse than that, because internal investigations within the European Commission found that it was what the Select Committee would later call Kafkaesque bureaucracy and terrible mismanagement within the Commission itself that meant that the money had sat in the budget for all that time. It was ready to go. It was just never signed off by the appropriate number of people. In 1999, this is what Claire Short would describe as what EU aid giving as the worst in the world. We promised a lot, we didn't deliver as much as we promised, and that's a terrible thing to do. The European Commission had some form on this. In 1991, it promised the Chinese to deliver aid to farmers in Tibet. It took 7 years to sign the contract, and 2 years even after that. None of the £5 million was delivered. It spent £16 million on a hospital in Gaza that lay empty for months. The Commission rightly promised lots of reforms in this area, including some of the things that Glynis mentioned: less bureaucracy, better financial control, a range of options on a type of menu that meant that all these checks and balances would mean not only would these EU aid problems be a thing of the past, but we would be getting much better value for money and much quicker delivery of aid. Scroll forward to 2004, and the EU watchdog of financial fraud, OLAF, uncovered a series of abuses in the EU aid budget. In one case, OLAF investigated an Italian not-for-profit organisation that received 11 million euros from the European Union and almost 17 million from Italy to finance 28 projects in the Third World, as it was then called. The probe showed the organisation had sent fake or duplicate invoices. You know, that was a proper fraud, but it was not found until way, way later down the track, and a whole host of other problems. This meant that the European Commission decided it would have yet another have a look at its processes to ensure this couldn't happen in the future. And I just think it's right for politicians to ask the question, not whether we should be paying more aid or not. I think everybody's agreed. The level of aid, you can never have enough in humanitarian aid. You can never be giving enough to lift people out of poverty. But taxpayers deserve the right to know that they are going to get value for money for the contributions that they make. In 2009-2010, the UK contributed about £1.4 billion to the EU external aid spending. It's about 18% of the UK's total £7.8 billion budget. And EU aid managed by the European Commission, the government at the time wanted to push down the amount of money that was held centrally, the administration costs, the problems with costs. And I know I'm coming across as a bean counter, but I hope you understand that it's a value for money argument I'm trying to make. The average costs were 5.4%, which were higher than DFIDs, which were 4% at the time. There are problems around the place. So the EU administration costs in the ACP countries were about 8.6%. And you can understand that to some extent because of there are certain difficulties at the time. But to put this into context, DFID only allows NGOs receiving UK aid to have a maximum spend of administration of 8%. It doesn't matter where the project is. So fascinated by this, the list of failures that I read out to you, I was interested to find out were there really kind of proper problems within EU aid. I wanted to go and see it firsthand for myself. So I disappeared out to my constituency's twinned with Iganga, which is a region of Uganda. And so when I was a member of the European Parliament, I disappeared out to Uganda. I didn't tell the Ugandan government I was going, didn't tell our government we were going, didn't tell the European Commission I was going. I met with various NGOs and people who received aid whilst I was out there. And it was a very interesting find. I found fantastically small, tiny NGOs that were doing wonderful things on the ground. I came to the conclusion that government-to-government aid should be a thing of the past way back then, that actually you can build some capacity, but actually if you really want to lift people out of poverty, you've got to get involved in projects that actually touch them at the lowest of levels. I was annoyed when I saw that the biggest building in Kampala was the European Commission building, which dominated the landscape and overlooked the Ugandan Parliament. And I was frustrated by the huge number of white Toyota Land Cruisers that were running around the place. I guess you know where I'm going with that. So there is so much we can do to squeeze, and we should be squeezing, better value for money out of the EU aid budget and indeed the DFID budget. The whole aim is to lift people out of poverty. And with that good intention, I really do welcome the report that Open Europe has published, because as a critical friend of the European Union, and especially the European Commission, I'd like to see it doing a darn sight better with the money we give it.